Hello there. This is a very specific video. I'm actually recording this for one specific person in mind, but I do hope that it becomes a little bit more relevant for people that maybe come across it, specifically those who are dealing with pain management and moving into a practice or an inquiry into how we can increase range of motion in our joints, as well as increase a healthy uniform tone across the whole body without ever taking out space or contracting our internal organs, our spine, shoulders, hips, and any of our joints, etc. When we start to move in a way where we look at the body really as a system, right? Not just saying we're holistic and using the buzzword, then we have to recognize that whatever we're doing in one part, it's going to affect something in a very different area of the body. Okay, so that's one detail that we can start to become aware of as we begin this inward expansion, imagining our ribs are like a balloon, the tissues of the body organized proportionally. So everything, as long as the ribs are opening in a uniform concentric way, 360, right? We've got to really think about multiple dimensions. As we open in that 360 way, all of the tissues are going to respond and pull more to a taut space instead of slack. And this particularly deals with the length of the spinal column. Now, if we're in a position where we tend to stay small, where we tend to stay small inside the body, the tendency is then the tissues go slack and we start to mold, or we start to do bicep curls, or we even do stand up and we can do squats and stuff like this. If our inner body deflates at all, right, and that is the first pattern usually to go, then there's an imbalanced amount of pressure and heaviness that actually sits on the rest of the skeleton. If you're used to traditional core work or strengthening at the center of the body, the trunk of the body is often put into more of a box shape where we really harden, particularly between the ribs and pelvis, as a way to protect. In this way of looking at suspension in the body, we're actually pulling those two places apart, which gives a whole lot more freedom for the belly to be strong by lengthening it as opposed to shortening it, which takes pressure on the joints, more heaviness on the hips, knees, and ankles, more compression in the spine, and actually compression in the vital organs, including the lungs. So when we're working space, this is always the idea that we want to approach when we go into the body is we're making space. No matter what, we're making space in our joints and along the vertical axis of our spine. So one of the first things that you want to start to work towards is building directionality. Now that might, not really understand, you might not understand that but directionally, when you know how to engage your musculature, your connective tissue wetsuit, right? It's effectively a hug across the whole body uniformly, front, side, back, top, bottom, all of the places are getting a hug, right? When you feel into that wetsuit, it's really important that you know which direction these tissues are actually moving. And in that, they create a flush of movement, pulsing of pump towards the core of the body as a way to continuously expedite and clear out cardiovascular support, the entire circulatory system, as well as our lymphatic drainage. Okay, so this is really important. So when you're lying in bed even, right, if this is something that's pretty new for you, if you deal with chronic pain in your life, right, and you know that yoga is just not accessible, going to the gym doesn't make any sense, even having someone work on your spine feels a little bit intimidating, I want you to really consider just pulling your arms back on and pulling your legs back on. And as you do that, just like you're putting on a pair of skinny jeans, you're trying to feel the tissues on all sides of the legs, on all sides of the arms. So this whole circular area, just hug towards the bone and towards your midline. So from the edges where things can stagnate and get sticky and arthritis can set in, from the very tips of your feet and arms, your legs, your fingertips, you pull towards the body, okay? Now, that might not feel like a whole lot is happening, but let's be real. If anybody comes along and starts massaging your arm, it's pretty calming for the nervous system, right? Bringing that area of soft tone, of engagement, not really trying to create any musculature. You can massage on the top of the arm and on the bottom of the arm. And again, while you might not feel anything so visceral, right? Like, oh, magically my shoulders feel better. What you will start to feel is more sensitivity, maybe even a little bit more tingling, maybe some warmth, some heat. Maybe you'll feel a part of your arm that was totally dead and asleep. And that's why you want to really feel like on all of the sides. Don't just massage on the top of your arm, massage also on the back of your arm, okay? So really feeling how even if you're lying in bed, when you lift your arms and lift your legs up, boy, is gravity going to help you. I can guarantee that you're going to get a lot more benefit, more bang for your buck if you do this lying on your back, which I'll show you in a second how to do it in a healthy way, where you pull your tissues towards the body and you can even shake. And just remember that all you're dealing with right here is sacs of fluid, right? Tissues and bones around muscles and fluid, right? And there's a lot more fluid that we want to sustain and we can find more access to when we get these tissues to flush and tone like a wetsuit on the whole body. Now, particularly as you work with this, I want you to become a little bit more aware of one specific area on the body where anybody that lives in modern culture is static, sticky, stuck, closed, tight, and oftentimes protective, okay? If there's ever been any trauma in the body, including someone honking at you and there was a reaction, there is trauma that lives inside our tissues, right? And I often say, let's remove those issues from our tissues, right? But what for most of us who live in sedentary culture, our butt tissues, our glute muscles, right? There's literally a medical term called gluteal amnesia, which means our butt has forgotten how to work, okay? So while you're massaging, particularly up the back of your legs, I want you to really direct the movement on the back of your hamstrings from the knee to the bottom glutes, so that instead of letting these tissues hammock and sag off the bone, you're literally pushing them and lengthening them. And as I sit back down, so I'm gonna have to lift my butt on one side to do that, I'm actively lifting my butt behind me. So I don't just stop at the bottom glute and I don't just kind of, right? I get in there, it's not like a wet handshake, okay? I get in there and I'm pulling my glutes from the hamstrings all the way to the knee, all the way back. And then I'm lifting them to allow a little bit more support to come into my lumbar spine. So I'm never working like a squeeze or a grip in my low back. I'm always finding more support and more tone up the back of the leg. And as I put my hip back down, I'm really sitting kind of heavy on my hand to sandwich the thigh into the muscle, right? So I'm really letting the thighs settle into the back of the hip socket, which is where the glutes and the hamstrings are going to be able to engage. What tends to happen in our culture, and this is why everyone has gluteal amnesia, is we rock and we actually sit on our tailbone, or we roll and we sit on one side of our hip instead of both sides of our pelvis. So we want to really feel that the lengthening of the hamstring, the mounding of the glute muscle is supporting a healthy and natural upward rise, curvy nature of the spine. So the low back in, the ribs back out, the neck back forward, and the head. It's just like a snake, right, along the back of the body. Make sure that as you do pull the hamstring, pull the glute muscles, you're taking the whole hand along the bone and the whole musculature tones, lengthens, and lifts as a way to support a healthy tip in the pelvis. Now, obviously, you can see I'm doing this sitting down. You can do this laying on your back. You can do this in your bed. But when you do practice this in a chair or at your desk, you want to try to feel that every time you do this, and don't just do it 2 or 3 times. See if you can go for like 10 or 15 whole leg strokes where you're just putting your leg on. Literally suction the tissues and hug them along the bone as you pull on your tights, just like a pair of tight jeans. The legs can actually hug back to the bone and become more concentrically strong. Every time you do that, the pelvic bowl can actually go into a little bit more of an anterior tilt, it's called. So a forward rotation, which is where really we have a healthy lumbar curve. So long as it's coming from this muscular support underneath, as opposed to this muscular effort above the pelvis. You want to really feel the support is coming from underneath. But there's a couple more things we could focus on with the arms, but just particularly for now, think about as you squeeze the bicep and the tricep, of course, coming from the fingers, think about pushing the tissues towards your armpit and inside, or where all the lymphatic system starts to drain more efficiently. You imagine you can kind of like just push up into the hand, push up into the armpit. I'm kind of pushing with my fingers against the bone and lifting into my armpit. It'll actually start to lengthen my side body, right? Not because I'm lifting my shoulder up, but because I'm lengthening and toning up into my armpit and making it much more hollow, which is, again, what helps to hold the rib cage and stay inflated like a balloon, not the gripping, squeezing, tightening that we're used to as far as contracting the abdominal muscles, okay? So pull the legs on, pull the arms on, tone the back of the legs, get the fabric of your leg muscles to move up so that the hamstrings don't just hammock and sag off the back of your leg. If you have any knee issues, if you have any bunions, if you have any hip stuff going on, very likely you have your knees more locked during your day when you're standing, when you're walking. You could even lock your knees while you're walking. Now, there's a spectrum that everybody is on as far as what that looks like in their own skeleton. But a lot of us are heel striking all day long or just hanging in our skeleton, and we become more bone-on-bone prone, literally prone to being more painful because we're starting to rub away the supportive tissues, cartilage and ligaments inside of the joints. So we have to really support the hollows of the body, which gives us a lot more support for dynamic movement, for projecting forward. But when you're in pain, that seems really not relevant and certainly not even accessible. So you can't jump right away to these advanced experiences, but the more you pull the tissues onto the body and work healthy range of motion, this is actually going to help you start to prepare for more engaged strength building or even cardio if you care about that at all, like biking or just walking at a little bit of faster pace. You can actually start to train your body to work smarter, more efficiently with all of the areas toned, as opposed to just the front of the body. You'll see before I move on to the second part, which is the feet. When you're moving your tissues towards the center from the edges in, I want you to really feel like, okay, palpate what's different between the inside and the outside of the arm. Where do I feel a little bit more bulk or tightness even? And where do I feel a little bit less? Like for me, my bicep is way stronger and tighter by the elbow and way more mashed potato-y up here by the armpit. Same thing, the whole back of the arm is usually a lot more slack. And then you can feel how the lower arm is even more developed than the upper arm. Same thing, if you ever do a lot of weight bearing, it's because you lock out your elbows. So when you go down to your legs, because a lot of us lock our knees out, you can feel, oh my goodness, you're right, the lower leg is way more developed and sometimes even swollen because of that. So that's where a lot of stagnation can set in. So there's swelling, there's pooling, there's losing power, losing sensitivity that can happen. But even still, it's more developed and tighter against the bone, whereas the upper leg, way more slack and passive. The front of the leg, outer leg, usually way more active than the inner thigh and the back of the thigh. And, you know, you might not really consider that, well, yeah, I should just do more squats, or yeah, I should just do more butt work. But really, we're looking at this body as a system. And so you know that if you're affecting one part of the body, you're going to affect a totally different area as well. So you really want to feel that inner opening. Everything dilates from the center proportionally. And this so mind-blowing when you really start to feel that sense of lightness that sets in when you focus on suspension as the way of holding the spine. All right, so now I'm dropping the ball. This can be a tennis ball. This can be a racket ball. That's actually a pretty good size and density. Or if you're really masochistic, you can go for a golf ball. That's my preferred. But if you're brand new to this, I might ease into that. Obviously, it holds its shape a lot harder, a lot more steadily rather, and it's smaller so it can really penetrate up into the bottom of the foot. All I'm doing, sitting down, I want you to start this way, is keeping my toes pointing towards the floor, rolling along a ball, right? Literally, like I have a vertical axis along my foot, the center of my foot, I just roll along that without letting my toes flicker up and down. Now, this might not feel like, again, a whole lot is happening, or it might hurt like hell and you stop the video and you never do this again. If it's the latter, stay with it, right? Maybe put less pressure on it first. And again, same thing, like less pressure as you're molding the tissues. And as you become more familiar and more aware of where the imbalances are, creating uniform tone, you can add more dynamic pressure. I'm just gonna go ahead and switch feet for my own balance. But what I encourage you to do is as you roll, feel what's going on the big toe side of the foot and the pinky toe side. Try to extend and lengthen your ankles on the inner and the outer ankles. And then feeling what's happening up into the knee joint. Don't grip, don't tighten, don't do anything. The one piece that you might do in your knees is just put your fingers back there and see if you can integrate a little bit more. Just like we were moving the tissues into the armpits, we also want to move the tissues into the knee pits. Do you know you have knee pits? Right, the back of the knees. And so the calf muscles kind of squeezing gently up into the back of the knee is going to be revolutionary for the strength, stability, but also healthy range of motion in our knee joints. Oftentimes as we get older, we think that range of motion is almost scary and potentially injurious. So we tend to kind of double down and lock in. And we lose movement when we do that. We lose the side-to-side plane in the hips. We lose the forward and back rotation in the pelvis. And it starts by losing flexibility in the ankle, right? So when you do this, rolling back and forth, I encourage you to stay with one foot for a good 3 to 5 minutes and just watch a movie or, you know, sip a cup of tea, whatever, do meditation and just focus on one leg. Then I want you to get up and walk around, keeping your toes to the ground. So you never want to flicker your toes up and lift. That's going to put you right back into pattern of just the front of the leg helping you to pull forward. And you really want to keep the back of the leg more awake, more lifted, and that is what actually propels you more forward. So that takes practice, just knowing how to, you know, learning how to walk again, no big deal, right? But that's a really healthy practice, is integrating the tissues, just like we were pulling tissues to the core, this way. When you roll the bottom of the foot, you're integrating tissue up into the whole of the leg, which really helps to create hydraulics. And that's where the detox and the pump and the pulse of lymphatic drainage and just healthy fluid movement can really fluctuate or circulate through the whole body. So a couple of rounds on both sides I'm doing just as I'm talking, but really feel that there's going to be difference because each hip is different. Each of us has one tighter, more protected side. So it also gives us a lot of feedback as we do this side to side. So I encourage you to do a lot of your practice sitting in a chair at the edge of it, and let a lot of your practice become about creating your posture, right? We think we just come into a seat and we're done, but there's actually a lot of refinements that come to creating a seat. So pulling on the tissues, pulling on the leg muscles, pulling on the arm muscles, and just letting that be a practice. What if that was the only thing you did for 10 minutes? Pull your arms and legs on and roll at the bottom of the foot and see what happens as you start to integrate more sensitivity. You allow the body to start to change the directional tone or the uniform engagement along the bones, holding up the skeleton, and you begin to feel that change is possible. This is the #1 piece, truly, when we approach healing. Feeling better in our joints, feeling stronger in our body. It has to start here. There's a lot of resistance that can show up in the brain first. So if you really take your time to simply create your seat and then work on your feet and then maybe pause for 10 minutes and just breathe. 5 minutes is good, 3 minutes is good. But in meditation, let the focus become on the internal dilation from the middle out, 360, and floating the ribs towards the sky, letting the head feel light and floaty like a balloon, and letting the belief that healing is yours, alchemy is inevitable, wash through you. changing the fear pattern, changing the response to pain, changing our internal dialogue about what the healing process will entail. Because it's not always pretty. This is becoming a big part of our practice, right? In fact, it could be the first and foremost piece, especially if we know our patterns and we know how we respond, whether we respond with fear or anger or sadness to life. Those things are all going to come on because we're threatening old patterns, and there's a way of just doubling down. And so we want to really feel like, okay, I know that there's going to be a learning curve. My response is fear, or whatever yours is, anger, sadness, pick one, but know that you have a tendency to lean to one of these when you're triggered, when you're protected, when you're defensive, when you're upset, okay? Calmly speaking to the body in a non-threatened moment, when you just took the time, 5 minutes, to pull your arms on, put your legs on, position your hips with the support of your legs and glute muscles, then maybe roll your feet before, or you can do this after meditation. But really spend some time in the belief and in the training of the mind and the breath to belief, to knowing, to the trusted process that there is a new horizon in front of you, but it does take a little bit of effort to get up that hill. Okay, so let me know if there's any questions about this. I'm going to do another video about the laying on the floor and letting even more passive actions help you to repattern any fear or anger or stress response by just being really passive and calming for yourself in a restorative way on the earth. All right, hope this helps. Let me know if you have any questions.